Finding a positive pregnancy test buried under tissues in my master bathroom should have been a miracle. However, my husband had a vasectomy 3 years ago, and the only other woman to use this suite was my best friend. They see me as an architect focused on blueprints, but they forget that my actual expertise lies in identifying fatal cracks in a foundation long before the entire structure collapses. My name is Sutton Vance, and at 34 years old, I have built Vanguard Horizons into the premier architectural firm in Seattle by respecting the laws of physics, gravity, tension, load-bearing capacities. If you respect the structure, it stands. If you ignore the stress points, it crumbles. This Tuesday morning, standing in my master bathroom, I was looking at a structural failure that no blueprint could have predicted. I used a pair of tweezers to lift the plastic stick from the wastebasket. It had been buried beneath a layer of makeup remover wipes, a clumsy attempt at concealment that insulted my intelligence. 2 pink lines. Positive. The biological math was impossible. My husband, Grant, underwent a vasectomy 3 years ago. We had signed the consent forms together, agreeing that my career and his consulting work required a child-free lifestyle. I was the only woman who used this bathroom. Well, the only woman who lived here. I thought back to the dinner party last night. It was intimate, just 4 of us. Me, Grant, Ilara, and her husband, Mike. Mike had indulged too heavily in the scotch and passed out in the guest wing by 10 o'clock. That left the 3 of us. Ilara, my chief financial officer, my best friend of 15 years, the woman who had access to my bank accounts, and, apparently, my private sanctuary. I did not scream. I did not throw the test at the mirror. Instead, I retrieved a Ziploc bag from the cabinet, sealed the plastic stick inside, and walked into my closet. I spun the dial on my wall safe, placed the evidence next to my grandmother's pearls, and locked it. Downstairs, the smell of bacon filled the kitchen. Grant was standing by the stove, wearing the cashmere sweater I had bought him for Christmas. He turned, flashing that boyish grin that had once made my knees weak. "Morning, babe," he said, plating eggs with a flourish. "I made you the scramble you like. You have that big meeting regarding the Skyline project today." Right, I sat down, watching him. He was performing. "Thanks," I said, my voice steady. He leaned in, kissing my forehead, but his eyes did not meet mine. "You know, I was thinking, maybe I should come by the office later. Take you to lunch. You've been working so hard lately. I have a full schedule." "Grant," I replied. "Right. Just try not to overdo it." "Okay. You look a little pale." I drove to the office with a cold knot in my stomach. Vanguard Horizons was my empire, a glass and steel testament to my obsession with perfection. When I walked into the executive suite, Ilara was already at her desk. She looked tired. "Espresso?" I asked, holding up a cup from her favorite cafe. Ilara flinched, covering her mouth slightly. "God, no. The smell is making me queasy. I think I ate something bad last night." She rubbed her lower abdomen absent-mindedly. "I'll just stick to ginger tea." I set the coffee down. "You look terrible. Elle, maybe you should go home." "I can't," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We have the Skyline budget review. Grant said he wanted to... we need to go over the projections." She had slipped. Grant had no official role in the Skyline project. He was just a sounding board. Or so I thought. I saw the panic flash in her eyes when she realized she had mentioned his name in a professional context. I went into my office and closed the blinds. I did not open the blueprints. Instead, I opened the app for our home security system. Grant believed the internal cameras were disabled when we were home to ensure privacy. He was wrong. I was an architect. I liked to know what happened in my spaces. I scrolled back to last night, to the timestamp of 9:15. The footage was crisp. I saw myself walking toward the wine cellar. Moments later, the camera in the hallway captured Grant and Ilara. He pulled her close, his hand resting possessively on her stomach. Are you sure? Is it safe? I heard Grant's voice through the speakers, low and urgent. Stop it. Grant. She might come back, Ilara hissed, pushing him toward the bathroom door. I just need to check. I'm late. They slipped into the master bathroom together, the same bathroom where I found the test. I closed the laptop. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was systemic. Grant was unemployed, living off my supplemental cards. Yet he was discussing my biggest project with my CFO. They were not just sleeping together, they were plotting. I looked at the skyline model on my desk. They thought I was just the architect who drew pretty lines. They forgot that I was the one who designed the trapdoors. I did not throw a tantrum. Instead, I treated my marriage like a condemned building that required a structural survey before demolition. Emotional outbursts are messy and inefficient, whereas data is clean and absolute. I sat at my desk, locked the door, and opened my laptop to begin the forensic audit of my own life. Grant was arrogant, but his fatal flaw was his laziness. He had logged into our shared cloud account on his iPad 3 weeks ago and never logged out. I accessed the calendar archives first. It was a simple pattern recognition exercise. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for the past 6 months, Grant had a calendar entry labeled board meeting. I cross-referenced this with the company schedule for Ilara. On those exact dates and times, she was marked unavailable for dental specialist appointments, unless she was having every tooth in her head replaced individually. They were lying. I dug deeper into the file directory and found a hidden folder named New Haven. I expected to find illicit photos, the kind of cliché evidence that fuels cheap tabloids. What I found was far more insulting. It contained PDF files of bank transfers and architectural blueprints for a 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs. I pulled up his credit report. The man who claimed to be a high-flying investment consultant had not earned a single dollar in 6 months. He was unemployed. The realization hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. He was funding his lifestyle entirely through the supplementary credit cards I paid off every month without looking at the itemized statements. He was using my money to play the role of a wealthy benefactor for Ilara and her social circle. But the betrayal went deeper than personal finance. I opened the vendor list for Vanguard Horizons. Ilara had approved a series of payments to a consulting firm called Vested Solutions. I ran a quick background check on the LLC. It was registered to Grant Vance. Ilara was not just sleeping with him. She was acting as his personal banker, siphoning capital from my company to fund their future. At 12:30, Ilara left for lunch. As soon as the elevator doors closed, I texted Kenji, a digital forensic specialist I utilized for corporate espionage protection. He was not a private investigator in a trench coat. He was a ghost in the machine. Kenji arrived within 5 minutes, carrying a discreet flash drive. I need everything, I said, pointing to Ilara's computer. Emails, deleted drafts, chat logs. You have 45 minutes. I only need 20, Kenji replied, his fingers flying across her keyboard. The encryption here is laughable. It is like she left the front door open. He handed me the drive shortly after, and I plugged it into my secure server. The emails were a roadmap of their conspiracy. I opened a thread subject-lined Future Plans. Grant. We can't keep the baby. L. Sutton will notice the expenses. If she finds out now, she cuts the funding. I need time to move the assets. Ilara, I am not killing this baby. Grant, it is our chance to be a real family. You said she was just a temporary fix. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I read Grant's reply. Grant, then make her miserable. Force the divorce. If we can get her to file, I can push for a settlement. I need a few months to liquidate what I can. I need capital to start over. But it was Ilara's response that solidified the ice in my veins. Ilara, God, she is such a dry cash machine. She looks at me with those dead eyes and asks about spreadsheets while I am carrying your child. She never wanted kids anyway. She is too selfish to love anything that does not have a blueprint. I sat back in my chair. the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark office. They thought I was a machine. They thought I was cold. They were about to learn that a machine does not feel pity when it crushes an obstacle. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the forensic accounting firm in New York. I was done surveying the damage. It was time to rig the explosives. I desperately needed a structural engineer for my life, someone who could tell me if the foundation was salvageable. I dialed Marcus, my adoptive uncle and the company's longtime legal counsel. He was the man who had handed me my diploma, the man who had walked me down the aisle when my father could not. If anyone could help me navigate this legal minefield, it was him. We met at a small coffee shop near the harbor. The rain was lashing against the windows, blurring the outside world into gray smears. Marcus looked uneasy. He kept stirring his black coffee, the spoon clinking rhythmically against the ceramic. Marcus. I found discrepancies in the reserve fund, I said, placing a printout on the table. Unexplained withdrawals labeled as consultation fees. Alara approved them, but they go to shell companies linked to Grant. Marcus did not pick up the paper. He did not even look at it. He sighed, a heavy, rattling sound. Sutton, listen to me. The IPO is 3 months away. The investors need stability. They need to see a united front. I frowned, the cold feeling in my stomach spreading. What are you saying? You want me to ignore embezzlement because of the public offering. He reached out and patted my hand, his palms sweating. Grant is, well, he is a man. Men make mistakes. Sometimes they stray, and sometimes they spend money foolishly to cover their tracks. But if you expose this now, the stock valuation will plummet. You have to be tolerant. Tolerant. I pulled my hand away. He is stealing from me. Marcus. He knows things. Sutton. Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. He knows about my tax situation in the Caymans. If he goes down, he takes me with him. Please, just let it go for now. The realization hit me harder than the betrayal itself. Marcus was not protecting the company. He was protecting himself. My husband was blackmailing my lawyer. I sat there, staring at the man I had viewed as a father figure, and saw him for what he truly was, a parasite. They were all parasites, feeding off the host I had worked myself to the bone to become. I was completely alone. No family, no best friend, no mentor, just me and the sharks. I drove home in a trance. When I walked through the door, the house smelled of garlic and rosemary. Grant was in the kitchen, humming a tune, a glass of red wine in his hand. He looked at the picture of the devoted husband. There she is, he said, wiping his hands on a towel. I made risotto, and I have something for you. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside lay a diamond pendant, suspended on a delicate platinum chain. It was exquisite. It was also purchased yesterday at 4 p.m. using my American Express information that he had stolen from my desk. Oh, Grant, I managed to say, allowing him to clasp it around my neck. I know I have been distant lately, he murmured, kissing the sensitive spot behind my ear. I just wanted to show you how much I appreciate everything you do. I turned and smiled, channeling every ounce of strength I possessed to keep from vomiting. It is beautiful. Thank you. As he kissed me, I was not feeling love. I was mentally calculating the sentencing guidelines for credit card fraud and identity theft. I was picturing him in an orange jumpsuit instead of cashmere. That night, while he slept the sleep of the guiltless, I crept out to the garage. I installed a tiny, high-fidelity listening device under the dashboard of his Range Rover. I had already planted one in Alara's office earlier that evening when I pretended to leave a file behind. 2 days later, the audio feed from the car confirmed that my husband was not just a thief, but a monster. I sat in my car, headphones on, listening to Grant and Alara arguing in the front seat of his vehicle. You have to calm down. Grant's voice came through, distorted but clear. The vasectomy story is our safety net. She thinks it is a miracle or a mistake. But what if she checks the medical records? Ilara sounded hysterical. What if she finds out you never did it? She won't. Grant laughed, a sound that made my blood run cold. I faked those papers 3 years ago. I never let a doctor near me with a scalpel. I knew I might need leverage one day. I was just waiting for someone fertile enough to give me a restart button. I took the headphones off. The silence in my car was deafening. He had not just cheated. He had biologically weaponized his body to trap me or anyone else who could serve his purpose. The last vestige of grief evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was done mourning my marriage. It was time to initiate the demolition. I bypassed the local legal circuit entirely. In a city like Seattle, networks were too incestuous, and favors were traded like baseball cards. I needed a mercenary who owed allegiance to nothing but the kill. I contacted Julian Thorne, a corporate shark based in New York who specialized in dismantling executive financial fraud. He was expensive, ruthless, and exactly what I required. We need to mark the bills, so to speak, Julian told me over an encrypted video call. His voice was smooth, detached, like he was discussing a weather report rather than the destruction of my husband. We cannot just watch them steal. We need to hand them the rope and film them tying the noose. Create a honeypot, a project that looks cash-rich and urgent. I spent the rest of the night fabricating a ghost project titled Project Phoenix. I generated a dummy trail of email correspondence, architectural renderings, and budget approvals for a high-end renovation in the historic district. Then, I transferred $250,000 from the company reserves into the project account. It was the perfect bait, $250,000 sitting in a liquid account, supposedly for immediate contractor retainers. I did not have to wait long. Ilara and Grant were desperate. Less than 24 hours later, my tracking software pinged. Ilara had authorized a transfer of $100,000 from Project Phoenix to a vendor labeled Vested Solutions for expedited materials. The money was moving fast. I watched the digital trail as it bounced from Vested Solutions to an offshore holding account, and finally to a private medical concierge service in Los Angeles. While tracking the money, I stumbled upon a document that made my breath hitch. It was a mortgage application for a second lien on our home. There, at the bottom of the page, was my signature. It was a good forgery, but the loop on the S was slightly too wide. Grant had used my identity to secure a massive loan without my knowledge. This was no longer just a civil dispute. He had committed federal bank fraud. That night, I retrieved the memory card from the device planted in Grant's car. I sat in my study with headphones on, listening to the panic in their voices. The doctor said the placenta is detaching. Grant. I need that specialist in L.A. Ilara's voice was shrill, laced with terror. If we don't pay the deposit by Friday, I could lose it. I am moving the money as fast as I can. Grant snapped, the sound of his hand hitting the steering wheel echoing in my ears. We just need to drain the Skyline account and then we go. We buy the place in Arizona, cash out, and disappear. Just hold on. They were planning to run. They were going to bleed my company dry and vanish into the desert. But my investigation uncovered something else, something that twisted the knife even deeper. In reviewing Grant's travel expenses charged to my cards, I noticed a recurring pattern. Every 2 months, he flew to Columbus, Ohio. He claimed it was for investment seminars. I dug into the credit card receipts for those trips, groceries, children's clothing, and utilities for a modest apartment in the suburbs. I searched the address. It belonged to a woman named Monica. I found her social media profile. It was private, but her cover photo showed her hugging a man who looked exactly like Grant, though he was wearing glasses and a beard. They were holding a toddler. He was not living a double life. He was living a triple life. I created a burner account and messaged Monica. I am investigating a man named Grant Vance for financial fraud. I wrote, "Does this man look familiar to you?" Her reply came 3 hours later. "That is my husband." Greg, who are you? My hands shook, but not from sadness. This was pure adrenaline. I had him. I compiled everything into a binder. 500 pages of bank transfers, forged signatures, audio transcripts, and evidence of bigamy. I had the emails mocking me. I had the medical records of the pregnancy he claimed didn't exist. I had the proof of the fraud he committed against 2 other women. I closed the heavy binder. It sat on my desk like a brick of solid gold. This was not just a divorce petition anymore. This was a prison sentence. If you want to catch a rat, you do not chase it into a hole. You place a piece of premium cheddar on a brightly lit stage and wait for its greed to overpower its survival instinct. I announced the Vanguard Horizon's 10th anniversary gala to be held right here, in the very mansion my husband was planning to leverage for a second mortgage. It was the perfect stage for a tragedy disguised as a celebration. I insisted that Ilara and Grant attend as my guests of honor. They tried to decline, mumbling about workload and stress, but I was insistent. I told them their presence was mandatory for the company image, to ensure compliance. I took Ilara shopping for her gown myself. We went to the most exclusive boutique in downtown Seattle. I pulled a dress of liquid silver satin from the rack. It was unforgivingly tight, constructed to cling to every curve, every flaw, and every secret. Ilara hesitated as she stepped out of the dressing room. The fabric strained slightly around her midsection, highlighting the small but undeniable bump of a 12-week pregnancy. She tried to suck in her stomach, but the satin refused to lie. "Oh, Ilara," I said, clasping my hands together in mock delight. "You look positively fertile. That weight gain really suits you. It makes you look so much more substantial than usual." She pulled at the waistline, her face flushing pink. "I don't know, Sutton. It feels a bit tight. Maybe a size-up nonsense," I insisted, signaling the clerk to wrap it up. "You are glowing. We must show off that figure." Grant was harder to manage. He was a nervous wreck, pacing the living room and checking his phone constantly. He sensed the walls closing in, but he was too arrogant to realize who was building them. I poured him a scotch and handed it to him with a smile that did not reach my eyes. "Stop pacing, Grant," I said soothingly. "Tonight is going to be your night. I am finally going to announce your appointment as honorary vice president. It comes with a corner office and the respect you have always deserved." His vanity won out over his fear. The tension left his shoulders. "Really? You're doing that for me?" "Of course," I lied. "You are my partner in everything." I wanted a full audience for the execution. I invited Marcus, the uncle who had sold me out for a tax loophole. I also contacted Ilara's parents, conservative people from the Midwest who thought their daughter was a saint. I told them Ilara had a surprise announcement that they would not want to miss. They flew in that morning, eager and oblivious. My preparations were precise. I contacted the bank and arranged for the official freezing of our joint assets and Grant's credit lines to trigger exactly at 7 o'clock in the evening. However, to ensure he did not receive the notification immediately, I installed military-grade signal jammers in the flower arrangements throughout the ballroom. No calls in, no data out. They were trapped in a dead zone of my creation. While Ilara was getting her hair done, I logged into the Vanguard Horizon's administrative server. With a few keystrokes, I revoked her credentials, her keycard, her email, her access to the accounts. Everything was wiped. By tomorrow morning, she would be locked out of the building she thought she was robbing. Then came the staff. The catering company provided the food, but the waiters were my own hire. They were not college students looking for extra cash. They were private security contractors, dressed in tuxedos and instructed to look like they were serving champagne. Their actual order was to secure the perimeter and ensure that once the doors closed, no one left until I said so. An hour before the guests arrived, I found Grant in the bedroom, struggling with his bow tie. He looked handsome in a superficial way, like a shiny apple that is rotten at the core. "I love you, Sutton," he said, looking at me in the mirror. I know I have been distant lately, but I am going to be the best VP you have ever had. I promise I will be loyal." I walked over to him and took the silk tie from his trembling hands. I tied it expertly, tightening the knot just enough to be uncomfortable against his throat. "I know, Grant," I whispered, smoothing the lapels of his jacket. "Tonight, the whole world is going to see exactly how loyal you are." I walked downstairs. The ballroom was filling up. The chandeliers sparkled, the champagne flowed, and the string quartet played a cheerful waltz. Everyone was smiling. They were drinking my wine and admiring my home, unaware that they were standing in a courtroom. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the impending scent of blood. The spotlight cut through the dim ambience of the ballroom, blinding me for a moment before my eyes adjusted to the sea of expectant faces. To my right, Grant and Alara stood like prized ponies, basking in the applause. Grant adjusted his cufflinks, flashing that rehearsed, winning smile at the investors, while Alara smoothed the silver satin over her stomach, looking every bit the proud executive. They thought the applause was for them. They were wrong. I tapped the microphone, the feedback whine silencing the room instantly. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Vanguard Horizons," I began, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. In architecture, we often talk about the facade. We obsess over the glass, the steel, and the polish that the world sees. But any architect worth their salt knows that a facade is meaningless if the foundation is rotten. If you build on lies, eventually, gravity takes over. And tonight, I want to talk about transparency. I turned to Grant and Alara, gesturing for them to step closer. I have a very special presentation to honor the tireless dedication of my CFO, Alara, and my devoted husband, Grant. They have been working incredibly closely on a project that I believe defines their true character. Grant beamed, puffing out his chest. "Thank you, honey. We just did what had to be done." "Indeed you did," I replied cold. I pressed the button on the remote in my hand. The massive LED screen behind me, which had been cycling through photos of our completed skyscrapers, went black for a split second. Then, it illuminated the room with a high-resolution image. It was not a building. It was a medical ultrasound. The grainy black and white image clearly showed a fetus, but the text overlay in the top right corner was razor-sharp patient Alara Vance, paternity match Grant Vance. Gestational age, 12 weeks. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It started as a ripple and turned into a wave of shock. Beside me, the sound of shattering crystal pierced the silence. Alara had dropped her champagne flute. She stared at the screen, her face draining of blood until she looked like a wax figure. Grant stood frozen, his smile twitching, unable to process the image looming over his head. "Sutton," Grant stammered, his voice barely audible over the rising murmur of the crowd. "Sutton, turn it off. This is a mistake. Please, but that is not all," I continued, my voice steady and amplified, cutting through his plea. "This child is a miracle, considering Grant's supposed vasectomy, but raising a family requires capital. And that brings me to the second part of my presentation. This baby is proof of a love that is extremely expensive." I clicked the remote again. The ultrasound vanished, replaced by a complex flowchart. It was a forensic map of the last 6 months of transactions. Red lines traced the path of money leaving the Vanguard Horizons reserve accounts, moving into shell companies, and finally landing in personal accounts. As you can see, I lectured, pointing to the screen like a professor. Over $250,000 was funneled from our corporate accounts into a fake entity called Vested Solutions. From there, it paid for leases on luxury cars, first-class flights, and... I clicked the remote one more time, zooming in on a specific invoice. A bespoke diamond necklace recently purchased by my husband. Grant looked like he was about to vomit. Ilara was shaking, clutching her stomach. You can't do this, Ilara hissed, tears streaming down her face. My parents are here. Please. Oh, I know, I said, looking toward table 5. And speaking of family, the screen changed again. This time, it displayed screenshots of text messages between Grant and Ilara. I had highlighted the most damning sections. Grant, just smile at your parents. Those hicks won't know the difference between a Pinot Noir and grape juice. We just need them to babysit once we move. Grant Marcus is a senile old fool. I have enough dirt on him to keep him quiet until we bleed the company dry. He is washed up. I looked down at the front row. Ilara's father was standing up, his face purple with rage, holding his wife who was sobbing into a napkin, a few seats away. Marcus sat slumped in his chair, staring at the screen in horror, realizing his betrayal had been mocked by the very man he protected. That's enough, Grant roared. He lunged toward me, his face twisted into a mask of pure fury. Turn it off. I said, turn it off. Before he could reach the podium, 2 waiters who had been standing quietly by the stage vaulted over the railing. They were not servers. They intercepted Grant with practiced efficiency, one of them grabbing his arm in a lock that forced him to his knees. Please remain calm, sir, the guard said, his voice flat. Get off me, Grant screamed, struggling against the grip. She is lying. She is crazy. I looked down at him, pinned to the floor in his tuxedo, and then back at the audience. The room was silent again, watching the destruction of a man who thought he was untouchable. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. I stood on the podium, looking down at my husband who was still struggling against the grip of the private security guards. The room was deadly silent, save for the hum of the projector cooling fan. You are not just an adulterer. Grant, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room without a tremor. You have committed embezzlement, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. You forged my signature on federal loan documents. As if on cue, the double mahogany doors at the entrance of the ballroom swung open. It was not the local police. 4 men and 2 women in dark suits walked in, their badges flashing under the chandeliers. My lawyer, Julian, had done his job perfectly. The local police handled domestic disputes. The Federal Bureau of Investigation handled bank fraud and wire crimes that crossed state lines. The color drained from Ilara's face so completely that she looked like a corpse in silver satin. She scrambled backward, knocking over a chair, pointing a trembling finger at Grant. I didn't know, Ilara shrieked, her voice cracking. He made me do it. He told me he had the authority. He said it was his money. I was just following orders. I am a victim here. Grant stopped struggling and stared at her, his jaw dropping. The realization that his partner in crime was throwing him to the wolves sparked a visceral rage. You lying witch, Grant yelled, spitting as he spoke. She is the CFO. She set up the shell accounts. It was her idea to drain the Skyline project. She said we needed the cash for the baby. He forced me. Ilara sobbed, turning to the agents who were closing in. I was scared of him. Please, you have to believe me. They were tearing each other apart, just as I knew they would. But I had one final nail for their collective coffin. Save your breath, I said, cutting through their cacophony. Since you are debating who the mastermind is, perhaps we should listen to the architect of this plan. I pressed play on the remote. The audio from the car recording blasted through the surround sound speakers. Grant's voice filled the room, arrogant and undeniable. I faked those papers 3 years ago. I never let a doctor near me with a scalpel. I knew I might need leverage one day. We just need to drain the Skyline account, and then we go. We buy the place in Arizona, cash out, and disappear. The silence that followed was absolute. Grant slumped in the guard's grip. There was no spinning this. He had just confessed to premeditated fraud and flight on tape. The lead FBI agent stepped forward. "Grant Vance, Ilara Miller, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and embezzlement." As the agents cuffed Grant, pulling his arms roughly behind his back, I stepped down from the stage. I walked through the crowd, which parted for me like the Red Sea. I headed straight for the side exit where Uncle Marcus was trying to slip away unnoticed. I blocked his path. He looked up at me, sweat beading on his forehead, attempting a weak smile. "Sutton, dear, I was just going to call my office to see how we can help fix this mess." Marcus stammered. "Don't bother," I said, pulling a thick envelope from my clutch. "You have been served. This is a civil lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty. And inside, you will also find a copy of the complaint I filed with the State Bar Association this morning regarding your malpractice and tax evasion." "Sutton, please," he whispered. "I am family." "You were an employee," I corrected him, "and you are fired." I turned back to the center of the room. The agents were marching Grant and Ilara out. Grant looked small in the expensive suit I had bought him. His head hung low. Ilara was sobbing loudly, stumbling in her tight dress. The flashing lights of the patrol cars outside casting chaotic shadows through the windows. The press photographers, whom I had ensured were on the guest list, were having a field day. The room remained frozen. My investors, my employees, and the city's elite were all staring at me with a mixture of terror and awe. They had come for a party. They had witnessed a corporate execution. I walked back to the microphone one last time. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, my voice calm and professional. "Vanguard Horizons is now free of rotting structures. Please, I invite you all to continue the evening. The waiters will be bringing out the dessert shortly. The justice system is a slow-moving beast, but when you feed it the right evidence, it can snap its jaws with terrifying speed." 2 weeks after the gala, Grant stood before a judge who looked at the evidence of the hidden property in Arizona and the forged passport applications and made a swift decision. Bail was denied. He was labeled a significant flight risk. The man who loved tailored suits was now trading them for County Orange. Ilara fared slightly better, but only because biology was on her side. Due to her high-risk pregnancy, the judge granted her house arrest pending trial. However, her assets were completely frozen. She had nowhere to go but back to her parents' house in rural Ohio. It was a poetic sentence. She was forced to live in the basement of the very people she had allowed Grant to mock as Hicks on a 40-foot screen. I heard through the grapevine that her father refused to speak to her, leaving her meals at the top of the stairs like she was a feral animal. I went to see Grant at the detention center on a rainy Thursday. The visiting room smelled of bleach and despair. When the guards brought him out, I barely recognized him. He had lost 10 pounds. His skin was sallow, and the arrogance that used to define his posture was gone, replaced by a slump of defeat. He sat down behind the plexiglass, picking up the phone with shaking hands. "Sutton," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Sutton, thank God you came. You have to get me out of here. The lawyer says. He says I am looking at 12 years. You can't let that happen." I sat quietly, placing a thick manila envelope on the counter. "I am not here to get you out, Grant. I am here to have you sign the divorce papers." He looked at the envelope, then back at me, tears welling in his eyes. "Divorce Sutton. Please, we can work this out. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I love you. Doesn't our marriage mean anything? You can't just throw me away." "I am your husband. You are a liability," I corrected him. "And I am liquidating it." I leaned closer to the glass. "But there is something else you need to know. Since your assets were frozen and your credit score is now non-existent, your creditors were getting nervous. You had a lot of outstanding gambling debts and high-interest personal loans that I found out about. So, I bought them." Grant blinked, confusion clouding his panic. "What I bought your debt, Grant," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. I purchased the notes from your creditors for pennies on the dollar. You don't owe the bank anymore. You don't owe the loan sharks. You owe me. Even when you get out of prison in a decade, every cent you earn will be garnished to pay me back. You will be working for me for the rest of your life." He dropped the phone. He stared at me with pure horror, finally realizing that I hadn't just beaten him. I owned him. I walked out of the prison feeling lighter than I had in years. When I turned on my phone, there was a voicemail from a blocked number. I knew who it was before I listened. "Sutton. It's Ilara," the voice sobbed, thick with misery. "Please, I don't have health insurance anymore. The baby. I am scared. I know you hate me, but please help me. For the baby's sake." I did not delete the message. Instead, I had my assistant email her a list of state-funded public health clinics that accepted indigent patients. Then, I permanently blocked the number. The fallout continued to spiral. As the FBI dug deeper into Grant's files, they found 5 other women across 3 states who had been swindled out of their savings. The media dubbed him the Casanova Swindler, turning him into public enemy number 1. His face was on every news channel, stripping away the last shreds of his dignity. Uncle Marcus did not escape the blast radius either. To avoid a prison sentence for his complicity, he agreed to a plea deal that involved surrendering his law license permanently. He was forced to liquidate his vacation home and his vintage car collection to pay restitution to my company. The man who once lectured me on tolerance was now filing for bankruptcy. Back at Vanguard Horizons, I initiated a brutal purge. Anyone who had been hired by Ilara or had shown blind loyalty to her regime was terminated. I replaced them with hungry, ethical graduates who cared more about structural integrity than office politics. The empire of lies that Grant and Ilara had built was impressive in its audacity, but in the end, it collapsed faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. They had spent years building a facade, but it took me only one night to expose the rot. The silence in my house was no longer a void that needed to be filled with noise or company. It had become a presence of its own, a cool and calming blanket that settled over the rooms. For weeks, I walked the hallways alone, reclaiming the space that had been contaminated by lies. But reclamation required renovation. I hired a demolition crew the week after the arrests. I stood in the doorway of the master suite, wearing a mask to block the dust, and pointed at the bathroom where I had found the pregnancy test. "Tear it all out," I instructed the foreman. "I do not want a single tile left standing. The plumbing, the fixtures, the walls, everything goes. Are you sure, Ms.?" Vance the contractor asked, looking at the expensive Italian marble. "This is top-of-the-line material. We could just destroy it." I cut him off, my voice leaving no room for argument. "I am turning this space into a library. I want books where the bathtub used to be. I want wisdom in this room, not waste." While my home was being healed, my business was undergoing a renaissance. I had feared the scandal would taint the reputation of Vanguard Horizons, but the market reacted in the opposite direction. Clients did not see a victim. They saw a woman who had cleaned house with surgical precision. Our contracts increased by 30% in the first quarter alone. They wanted the architect who could spot a crack in the foundation and had the courage to fix it, no matter the cost. However, rebuilding a company was easier than rebuilding a psyche. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Eris, to dismantle the guilt that plagued me at night. "I should have known," I told her during one session, staring at the floor. "I analyze structures for a living. How did I miss the rot in my own marriage, Sutton?" "Doctor," Eris said gently, "you were looking for support beams, not trap doors. You cannot blame yourself for trusting the floor to hold you." Healing also came from unexpected quarters. I reached out to Monica, the woman in Ohio who had been Grant's other victim. We met for coffee when she flew into Seattle to give a deposition. She was younger than me, softer, with tired eyes that had seen too much crying. "He told me he was an orphan," Monica said, gripping her latte cup with both hands. He said he had no family, that I was all he had. I feel so stupid. You were not stupid. Monica, I replied, reaching across the table to touch her hand. You were in love. He was a professional con artist. He made me believe he was sterile for 3 years. We are not fools. We are just human. We did not become best friends. There was too much pain between us for that. But we shared a moment of release, a mutual acknowledgement that we had survived the same storm. The closure I needed finally arrived in a courtroom 6 months later. Grant stood before the judge, looking gray and withered. The arrogance was gone. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison for wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. Alara was not present at the sentencing. She had given birth 2 weeks prior. Alone in a county hospital, Grant was denied visitation rights. The child, a boy, entered the world with nothing but his mother's debt and his father's criminal record. Alara received a suspended sentence and 5 years of probation due to her role as a cooperating witness and her status as a new mother, but the financial judgment was crushing. She was ordered to pay restitution that would keep her in poverty for the rest of her life. The divorce decree was the final stroke of my pen. I won everything: the house, the cars, and the liquid assets. I even recouped the luxury items Grant had purchased for Alara using my money: the designer handbags, the diamond necklace, the silk scarves. I did not keep them. I organized a private auction, inviting the wealthiest women in the city. These items were bought with stolen ambition. I told the crowd as the bidding began, let us turn them into honest capital. I raised over $150,000 that night. I signed the check over to a nonprofit organization that provided seed money for female entrepreneurs. It felt like the perfect alchemy, turning Grant's deceit into another woman's dream. That night, I stood on my balcony, looking out over the Seattle skyline. The air was crisp. I was 35 years old, divorced, and alone, but for the first time in my life, I did not feel lonely. I realized my value was not attached to the ring on my finger or the man in my bed. I was the architect of my own life. I had survived the collapse, cleared the debris, and now I was ready to build something that would last. It had been exactly 365 days since the gala that changed everything. I stood on the rooftop terrace of the Clarity Tower, the newest addition to the Seattle skyline and the crown jewel of my portfolio. The wind up here, on the 48th floor, was fierce and cold, but it felt clean. It felt like the future. In my hand, I held an envelope stamped with the seal of the federal penitentiary. It had arrived that morning. My assistant had tried to screen it, but I insisted on seeing it. I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the cheap, rough paper. Grant's handwriting, once so confident, looked jagged. My dearest Sutton, the letter began, I know you are angry, but I have had time to think, and I forgive you. We were a team. You and I still love you. If you could just come visit. I know I can explain I stopped reading. He was still trying to manipulate the narrative, still trying to pull the strings of a puppet that had long since cut its own cords. He did not love me. He missed his bank account. You never learn, do you? Grant, I whispered to the empty air. I flicked a gold lighter open. The flame danced in the wind, struggling to stay alive until I touched it to the corner of the letter. I watched the paper curl and blacken, the words turning into ash before they could poison my mind again. I opened my hand and let the charred remnants fly away, carried off by the updraft, scattering over the city like gray snow. It was not just paper burning, it was the final severance of a dead limb. The ghost of Alara had been exorcised a week prior. I had run into her at a small discount supermarket on the edge of town. I was there to check on a site for a pro bono community center I was designing. I reached the checkout counter and froze. The woman scanning the items looked 10 years older than the Alara I knew. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, showing streaks of premature gray. Her skin was pale and etched with exhaustion. She wore a faded name tag that sat crookedly on her vest. "That will be $12.50, she mumbled, not looking up. "Keep the change," I said, handing her a $20 bill. Her head snapped up at the sound of my voice. For a second, our eyes locked. I saw the shame flood her face, turning her pale cheeks a blotchy red. She looked down immediately, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the register. "Sutton, I—" She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I waited for the anger to rise, but it never came. I did not feel the urge to scream or mock her. I just felt a profound, heavy pity. She was a woman who had gambled her soul for a shortcut and lost everything. "Take care of yourself, Alara," I said softly. I picked up my bag and walked away. I did not look back. She was no longer a villain in my story. She was just a stranger with a sad life. Back on the rooftop, the heavy steel door behind me opened. David walked out. He was the lead structural engineer on my new project. He was a man of few words, blunt honesty, and zero charm, which was exactly why I liked him. The wind load tests came back, David said, handing me a tablet. "The numbers are solid. No variances. I double-checked them myself because I know you hate surprises." "I do hate surprises," I replied, taking the tablet. "Thank you for being thorough." He looked at me, his expression serious. "I don't play games with physics, Sutton, and I don't play games with people. The foundation is good." Good. I smiled, and for the first time in a long time, it reached my eyes. Then, "Let us build." As I looked out over the city, I realized something profound. The best revenge was not seeing Grant behind bars or Alara scanning groceries. The best revenge was living a life so full, so vibrant, and so successful that their existence became irrelevant. They were just footnotes in a biography that was just beginning. The cracks in my life had been welded shut. The foundation was reinforced with steel and wisdom. I was not just standing. I was soaring. I turned away from the edge and walked toward the elevator. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the highest floor possible. The doors slid shut, sealing out the noise, the wind, and the past. I was going up, and I was never coming down again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel. Like this video and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people.